You said about the angels ripping it away from the original teachings. Of course, actually 1,200 odd years had passed before Thomas Aquinas came along and rewrote the idea of angels. The first millennium was nothing like the second millennium in terms of what was being accepted. You mentioned Michael, Gabriel, Raphael, and Uriel for a long time. Raphael was only accepted by Catholics. Uriel is not really accepted even today. Michael, Gabriel, Raphael, and Uriel are very largely writ in New Age thinking. People will call on Raphael for healing, they'll call on Michael for protection, they'll call on Gabriel for communications, interestingly, to better opportunities, so if you want to go for a job interview. If we're talking about angels as far as the Old Testament, they weren't what we think they were. Well, up until about the year 1300.
Well, I've got a very broad interest in religious and spiritual belief anyway, whatever background that is. My faith position is grounded and anchored in the person of this man, Jesus, who walked this earth 2,000 years ago. So I worship him. He is my God because God is manifest in him in human form. And the only way I can connect to this great spirit that Christianity calls God the Father, I have to do through him. So he's my intermediary because he is my God. I can relate to a man, I can relate to you, I can see you, and I know what a bloke is, and I can relate to this man, Jesus. So that's where I come from. And Jesus was a rabbi. Jesus was a Jewish man, and Jesus was steeped in the traditions of his culture, which was the Tanakh, the Torah, all of the oral tradition that they would have known about, that he would have grown up on, that he would have had sung over him when he was a little boy. So he was steeped in the Judaic faith. So in order for me to try and understand his teachings, to try and understand his views, to try and understand where he's coming from, I've got to walk down his path, his backstory of the Judaic faith, which is why we're discussing the Tanakh as this sacred book. The Tanakh is within Judaism that Messiah comes. Now, the Jews currently do not recognize that Jesus was Messiah, although there are a growing number who are termed Messianic Jews, who do recognize him as Messiah. And a growing number of Jewish believers are beginning to see that. And I can understand why that's a real challenge for them, in the same way as I can understand why it's a real challenge for Muslims to recognize who he is. Not because they are curmudgeonly and cantankerous about all of this, but because they have such a high view of God. And it's that desire to protect God, and God could never present himself as human. In my faith, Jesus is the presentation of God in human form. And then you look back and you go, well, what did he know? What stories do we have that fed into his life? And as I can see it, looking back through the Tanakh, as I say, we don't have this systemized belief system that's been put into place from probably 11th century, maybe 10th century moving forward, picked up by Christendom later on through people like Thomas Aquinas and Catholicism. And obviously you have the great schism as well that took place in around about, 1096, where you had Eastern and Western Christianity divide. So you've got a difference again between what Orthodox Christians believe, what Roman Catholics believe, what Protestants believe, all sitting under a banner of Christendom. But these have all come into shape and play probably from 325 AD onwards, when Constantine took over as emperor and became Christian, and Christianity then became political. Church and state wed. And if you wanted to get on, become a forbidden bishop, it didn't matter if you loved hot pokers being popped up your bottom or whatever your vice was, it was about power. And so since 325 onwards, we've seen lots of things brought into Christianity, a little bunny ears, inverted commas, which are not Christian. But they've been around with us for so long, we now follow the tradition and we don't go back to what Scripture says, and we elevate tradition over Scripture, which is where, as I said to you in the last time, I fell foul with some of the traditions of the Catholic Church. So I didn't realise how heavily steeped in the tradition they were, which when I look at Scripture, the two don't align.